Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We will give you all just a few seconds to officially join us. So come on in, feel free to get comfortable. For those of you who are joining us, this is the FAFSA State and National Trends webinar with presenter Bill DeBaun from the National College Attainment Network. And so we are so excited that you all are here and joining us for this timely conversation. So we will give you just a few seconds to settle in, to get comfortable before we begin as well. Awesome. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Nayada Schuler, and I serve as the chair of the SACAC Webinars Committee. I also had the honor of serving as the host for today's webinar as well. Additionally, I'm joined from the audience by Stephanie Hospodar, as well as on screen or on camera by Brian Cooper and Christine Hall, a few of our webinar committee members who will be assisting with technical support, as well as monitoring the Q&A throughout the presentation. On behalf of SACAC and the Webinars Committee, we would like to welcome you to today's session titled FAFSA State and National Trends. We also again have the honor of being joined by presenter Bill DeBaun, Senior Director of Data and Strategic Initiatives at NCAN, the National College Attainment Network. So just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is a webinar format, so audience mics are muted. We encourage you to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for the presenter, and if time allows, at the end, we will have the chance to answer them as well. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will later be shared with SACAC members. Again, thank you for joining us today. And now, at this time, I will pass things over to our session presenter to get us started.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction and for having me. It is really great to be here with you all today. I am here to talk about a topic that will be, I guarantee you, all sunshine and rainbows, the class of 2024's FAFSA submission trends to date. My name is Bill DeBaun. I am a Senior Director of Data and Strategic Initiatives here at the National College Attainment Network. I have been at NCAN for going on 11 years and have a lot of experience working with our member programs with data, helping them use things like FAFSA completion data, post-secondary enrollment and completion data to drive students' post-secondary outcomes. Let me just give you a quick thumbnail sketch about NCAN. If you haven't heard of us before, I just mentioned our members. Who are our members? NCAN's members are a real melting pot of different stakeholders. We have our roots really in the community-based organization, college access program space, but we have really grown in recent years to be more expansive, more inclusive of organizations like districts and schools, higher ed institutions, state education agencies, philanthropies, state college access networks. You name it, we've probably got it in our 500 plus member base that spans the entire United States. We're based in Washington, D.C., and our members, despite being very diverse in size and shape, are really united in pulling in the same direction for increasing equity and excellence in post-secondary access and attainment. We largely do our work through three main buckets of work. We, first of all, help to build the field capacity, right? We try to make our members the best versions that they can be of themselves. We do things like webinars like this one all the time. We do trainings for members through our e-learning platform. We have a great national conference. Come see us in Anaheim in September. We run a blog. We've got all kinds of great member resources, and definitely encourage you to check those out. We also do policy and advocacy work at the federal and state level. If you have heard about calls to double the Pell Grant, we have been loudly leading that charge for quite some time. We try to advocate for policies and policy solutions that eliminate barriers for students to access and attain a post-secondary education. And then the third bucket of work here is around increasing alignment and collaboration. There are a lot of different organizations and people that have a hand in students' post-secondary outcomes. And we want to make sure that those folks all know each other and that the dots are getting connected about what everyone can be doing to drive post-secondary access and attainment work forward. So we definitely try to build that connective tissue across different organizations and systems. And we love to make new friends. So come knock on our door. All right, so let's talk about the FAFSA, the real main force today. So FAFSA, what I usually say about the FAFSA is that the FAFSA is a 5-letter acronym that makes people say 4-letter words. And that is especially true this academic year. This spring has been very difficult for the field, as you no doubt are experiencing, have heard from colleagues. And unfortunately, I'm not here to really say that there's a light at the end of the tunnel here, but I can at least show you where we are right now through about mid-April. Before I jump into the data, though, I just want to talk a little bit about the FAFSA and how we got to this point. FAFSA simplification, the idea that the FAFSA was a burden on students and families, was a policy change that a lot of people, national, state, and local, pushed for many years, right? The form was too long, too onerous, too complicated. It was in and of itself an obstruction to accessing the financial aid that students need to afford college. And so there were 2 pieces of legislation that were really key to bring us where we are here today. First was the Future Act, which allowed the IRS to share federal tax information with the Department of Education for the purposes of completing the FAFSA. It opened up the data linkage between the IRS and the Department of Education. The second big piece was the FAFSA Simplification Act, which, as you might imagine, simplified the FAFSA. We went from about 108 questions max to about 36 questions max, and also changed the way that Pell Grant eligibility was calculated, made the Pell Grant relatively more generous, and also expanded eligibility to students who were previously ineligible for the Pell Grant. The simplified FAFSA was actually supposed to open up for the 2023-24 FAFSA cycle. That did not happen. There was a 1-year delay on that. It got pushed to the 24-25 cycle, which is what we are living through right now. Normally, the FAFSA opens on October 1st. This year, it did not open on October 1st. And that is an important thing that we're going to see the effects of in just a few minutes. The FAFSA really wound up opening around December 31st. And then, as you have heard, right, there were a lot of hiccups. There were technical glitches. There was some downtime at the very beginning. And so there have been a lot of challenges. And I think it's easy to lose sight of the big picture benefits or what the big picture aim was here with FAFSA simplification. But the old FAFSA wasn't exactly beloved by the college education, by the post-secondary education field, and so it really was in need of reform, at least from where NCAN sits. And because of the way the rollout has gone, I think some of the benefits have been obscured. My hope is that when we can get back to a regular October 1st opening and we can get all the kinks worked out of the system, that the benefits of the simplified FAFSA will be much clearer to see. But we are kind of slogging through it right now, and so let's take a look kind of at where we are. Okay, so before I do that, let me give you a little background and just talk about the FAFSA enrollment connection, which is something I imagine you as professionals are very interested in. FAFSA completion matters, but FAFSA completion isn't the be-all, end-all. We don't really care about FAFSA completion as its own outcome. We care about FAFSA completion for what it represents, right? We care about FAFSA completion because it is a good leading indicator of what students are likely to do after high school graduation. And so we can see here by immediate college enrollment following high school graduation, the connection between completing a FAFSA and immediate college enrollment is much stronger, especially for students in higher poverty school districts. Okay, so we see this association. I don't want to talk about causality. I want to talk about association and the way that 2 things move or don't move in the same direction. FAFSA and college enrollment tend to move in the same direction. I'm going to show you that right now. This is at the state level. So the x-axis here is our state's June 30th FAFSA completion percentages, and the y-axis are state's immediate college enrollment rates for high school seniors. And you can see a strong positive association for states. Where we see June 30th FAFSA percentages being high, we also see immediate college enrollment being high for high school seniors. Which is the national level, right? If we look at the national FAFSA completion rate by June 30th, and then we look at the national first fall enrollment rate, this is according to the National Student Clearinghouse's high school benchmarks report. And you look at the year-over-year percent change in FAFSA completion. These arrows move in the same direction. When FAFSA goes up, enrollment goes up. When FAFSA goes down, enrollment goes down. The thing I really want to call your attention to is this this cell here at the very bottom, this minus 36%. One of these things is not like the other in this column. Minus 36% is much larger than the other percent changes that we have seen. This minus 36% is where we are nationally for year-over-year percent change in FAFSA completions for high school seniors through April 12th. And unless something changes very rapidly, we are headed in a direction that will see a big red down arrow in this national first fall enrollment rate for the class of 2024. I want to show you some data now around how we know what high school seniors are doing in terms of FAFSA completion. So the data file that you see in the upper left of your screen here, this is what Federal Student Aid puts out every Friday afternoon. They put out a high school level FAFSA completion file that has submissions, completions for the current year and the previous year. And so I take that data. If you're ever wondering what I'm doing on a Friday afternoon after this webinar, if you're like, wow, Bill gave a really great presentation, I wonder what he's doing. It'd be so interesting to know. It's probably I'm updating the FAFSA tracker, because that's what I've been doing pretty much every Friday afternoon for the past 7 years. And so we take this data and we transform it into what we think is a very visually appealing, very useful dashboard that is publicly available and displays data at the national, state, and local levels. And the FAFSA tracker lets us show FAFSA completion trends both within FAFSA cycles longitudinally and then across FAFSA cycles. So it really does give us kind of a bird's eye look at how things are going. So let's talk about national FAFSA trends. This is what's on the front page of the tracker right now. So on the left-hand side here, let's do this one first. We tend to look at two big metrics. We look at the percent of seniors completing a FAFSA, and that's a measure of absolute performance, right? Every state wants that number to be as high as possible. And so on the left-hand side here, you can see that we are about 17.5 percentage points behind where we were last year in high school seniors completing a FAFSA. We are at 29.3% of the senior class nationally completing a FAFSA through April 12th. On the right-hand side, we have the year-over-year percent change in FAFSA submission and completion. Submission is in the orange line, light blue is the completions. Well, let's not do that. Let's go this way. Great. You can see that both of these numbers are really steep declines, right? You might be asking, why do we have submissions and completions on here? And also, why is the completions line so short? These are good questions. I show the submissions here in orange because that is what we have had roughly going back to the start of the FAFSA cycle. And so we can see the shape of the whole cycle since this FAFSA form opened. We only started getting data on completions 3 weeks ago. So I only have 3 data points for that. It's not as interesting to look at. So I figured I would provide both. We've only had completions for 3 weeks because, as you know, FAFSA processing was quite delayed until about mid-March. Financial aid offices weren't getting ICERs, which are what they need to generate award letters. And so that has been a big delay in the process. It's one of the main stressors that we have right now on the whole system. This is a heat map of year-over-year percent change by state. I really wish there was more light blue or even dark blue here, but we have all the shades of yellow and orange because every single state is underwater right now in terms of year-over-year percent change in FAFSA completion. Indiana is doing the best, and they are still down 23.4% year over year. So I don't mean to keep harping on this. I still will keep harping on this. There is a lot of work to do this spring because even the best case scenario right now is still an extremely steep drop, even relative to previous years. So this chart shows the past 7 graduating classes and their percent of seniors completing a FAFSA over the first 52 weeks of the FAFSA completion cycle. And the gap here on the x-axis between where FAFSA completion cycles normally start and where we have data for completion, the gap, the delayed opening, is what I think is the biggest factor here. Students have just had a smaller window to complete the FAFSA. And so consequently, you can see that through April 12th here, we are, I don't know, 15 to 20 percentage points behind where our normal FAFSA cycle is. Even this black line here, which was the class of 2021, which we're all in agreement was a bad year for FAFSA completion, we would kill to have FAFSA completion outcomes that looked like the class of 2021s right now. So you can also see that we are running out of room, running out of time before we hit this vertical gray line, which represents June 30th. There's no special piece about June 30th, except that we always look at it as kind of the time when students probably will not have that much support from their high school to complete the FAFSA. Right? High schools are a big purveyor of FAFSA completion support. Past that high school graduation date, and the high school graduation date is coming up even sooner than that in a lot of states. Past the high school graduation date, we don't expect most students to have FAFSA completion supports readily available. And so we've always looked at June 30th as a major, I don't want to say cutoff, but as a major milestone to see like how well did we do in the bounds of the actual academic year before high school graduation. This is the year-over-year percent change in students completing a FAFSA for the United States for the class of 2018 to 2024. And you can see that, again, looking at this black line, which was the class of 2021, even in the worst part of the class of 2021, we did not see a percent change like this. And so these numbers floating around out here in the bottom, they give me a lot of concern, bordering on panic, honestly, about what will happen for class of 2024 and their enrollment outcomes. We also break these data out by high school categories, right? So I don't have access to student level FAFSA data. States do, and sometimes they share it with schools and districts, but I don't have access to student level FAFSA completion data. So the way that I try to understand the completion behaviors of students from different demographics is to use the characteristics of their high schools as a proxy. So I break down their high schools into low income and higher income, and that's either plus or minus 50% of students eligible for free reduced price lunch. I also look at by the percent of students of color. So high minority high schools are 40+% Black and Hispanic students enrolled. Low minority students less than 40%. And then we also get this data from about geographic locale, and all of this data comes from the National Center for Education Statistics. And so you can see here, when we break out the year-over-year percent change and the estimated percent of seniors completing by these high school characteristics, we have some major equity gaps here. We have about an 8 percentage point difference between higher income and low income high schools. We have about a 7 percentage point difference between high minority and low minority high schools. FAFSA has always been an equity issue, right? When we talk about FAFSA completion and connecting students to financial aid, we know that disproportionately, first-generation students, many of whom are low-income students, many of whom are students of color, benefit from financial aid, federal, state, that can make college more affordable for them. And so when we talk about catching up this cycle, we need to ask, for whom are we doing the catching up? Because we have some real gaps to close here, and we know that students, low-income students, first-generation students are going to be disproportionately negatively impacted by the circumstances we find ourselves in right now. And so NCAN members, and I imagine a lot of you, are very interested in making sure that we are connecting students with the financial aid that would most benefit them to pursue a post-secondary pathway. And so we take a look at this and report on this. We report this at the state level as well. I want to hammer home the kind of low-income, higher-income high school piece. Only in Wyoming is the school-level FAFSA completion rate for low-income high schools greater than that of higher-income high schools. So this is an equity challenge that we have nationally and in 49 of 50 states right now. And that is something that we should be paying real attention to, because we will see inevitably, if we do not assist these students, steeper enrollment declines from the student groups that I just talked about. So let's talk about SACAC trends. These are the estimated percent of seniors completing and submitting for SACAC states here on the left, and then nationally, the national benchmarks here on the right. And so your states are running a bit behind the national figures by both measures right now through April 12th. When we look at your states for the class of 2024 relative to the class of 2023, we see about an 18 percentage point difference, running behind about 18 percentage points from where we were last year. Again, this is just the completion piece. If the submission piece is also really interesting to you, I'm happy to send that over. These are the individual states. And so the light blue line here is the percent of seniors completing for the class of 2023. The orange line is the class of 2024 percent of seniors completing, and the dark blue is year-over-year percent change. And so these vary quite a bit, but you can see that no one is less than 30% down. Yeah, less than 30% down year-over-year. The gaps here are really staggering, right? When we think about high school graduation being 10 or fewer weeks to go, I think it is very likely that many, if not most states, will be running 10 to 15 percentage points behind by June 30th, where they were last year. We could talk about the implications for that in just a second. One thing I also want to flag here, though, on the submissions versus completions piece is that submissions always run larger than completions. Submissions include FAFSAs that have errors that need to be corrected. So completions are necessarily a subset of submissions. Submissions in a normal year run about 7% larger than completions. This year, submissions are running nationally about 36% larger than completions. And part of that is because corrections weren't open for the FAFSA process until last week, really consistently. And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in there, right, to go in and be corrected and have those submissions that are on the books converted to completions. And once a FAFSA comes to completion, then it can be processed. Then institution gets the ICER. Then we can generate award letters, and we can kind of keep the process moving here for students. The reason I'm flagging this submissions to completions ratio is that it's really important that students go back and make these corrections, and they should be encouraged to do so however you possibly can. In previous years, we've talked about verification melt, the idea that some students are selected for verification in FAFSA to go back and provide additional information, right? They are really pushing down the verification selection rate this year because of all this whole thing going on. But it's possible that as large as FAFSA submissions are running ahead of completions, that this gap could be the same kind of stumbling block that verification has been in previous years. And to me, it'd be really tragic to have a student and family be interested in engaging in the FAFSA completion process, make a submission, have a correction to make, not make that correction, not get connected with the financial aid. And so I'll be watching these kind of rates really closely every week to see, are we closing the gap? Nationally, we closed the submission completion gap by about 4% last week. So I'm hoping that we will see, as corrections ramp up, we will see these gaps close. But it's something that you want to look out for, because not only do we need to be assisting new students, additional students into the FAFSA completion pipeline, we also need to be getting the students who have already been in our pipeline to go back and make the corrections that they need to. I did want to share that I mentioned kind of the equity gaps that we're seeing nationally among who is and isn't completing the FAFSA. And those exist for your states as well. So we can see here for higher income and low income high schools, there's about a 9 percentage point gap between school level FAFSA completion rates. These cover about 360,000 students in each group, so it's large. I combined all the high schools that are in these categories across all the SACAC states. And we see a similar kind of gap here for high minority and low minority schools, right, where we have about little less than 9% gap between these two categories. And so the equity issues that persist nationally, I don't think it's a surprise to you, also are persisting in the southern states that we're talking about right here. One more look at kind of the distribution of FAFSA completion rates. So on the left-hand side here, you have deciles, 10 percentage point groups of schools by their free reduced price lunch eligibility rate. And you can see kind of the trend here. This is pretty interesting, actually. You see the trend is that until about the 70% mark, you see declines in FAFSA completion rates at the school level. And then we get a slight bump back up for the 80th to 100th, 80 to 100% FERPL rates. Still not anywhere close to the 0 to 30% rates, but you see FAFSA completion decline as low income levels go up. And the challenge here is that you have a lot of students. The thickness of these bars is weighted by the number of students in each group. And you can see that you have a lot of students in these 40, 50, 60, 90% free reduced price lunch eligible schools. And so when we think about where's like the juice worth the squeeze here, this is where a lot of students are, and this is where FAFSA completion rates are currently low. And if we see FAFSA completion declines and we see enrollment declines, it is likely going to come from students from these groups. That was a lot of data. If you're not a data person, I am very sorry. That was probably a lot for you. But I think the data do tell a really compelling story about where we are and how dire this is. But I'm also a words guy. I'm not just a numbers guy. And so I have been thinking this quote to myself a lot this spring, because this has been a very tremendously heavy lift for our field. And I think a lot, almost every day, about Sir Winston Churchill and his quote that if you're going through hell, keep going. And I think about that quote so much because we don't really have an alternative, right? Students depend on us to help see their post-secondary aspirations and plans through. And in a lot of cases, our collective field thinking about matriculation for students is the key resource for students and families. So when we think about the implications and projections here, I mean, the implications are really dire. I mean, I think that nationally we are on track to be down 10 percentage points year over year in terms of FAFSA completion. Last June 30th, high school seniors were at 53.4% on June 30th. Right now, we are at 29.3%. We would have to get 15 percentage points in the next 10 weeks to get within 10 percentage points of last year. And so I really think that this needs to be an all hands on deck kind of moment nationally. We had a FAFSA week of action last week from the U.S. Department of Education. That was good. But we need to see more members of Congress, governors, elected officials, mayors, college presidents, all getting in the game, diverting attention, raising awareness, and providing resources to make sure that students are getting the FAFSA completion assistance that they need to get connected with financial aid that will make college possible for them. It is really difficult to make projections, especially about the future. Thank you, Yogi Berra. The tracker has never really had to do projections like that. That's never really been a part of this project for me. But I've kind of tried to map out, okay, if every week we had some gains in the rate of percent of seniors completing, that we increase every week. And we also take a look at the FAFSA submission to completion ratio that I was just talking about. Under different conditions for those, where would we be? And under the worst case scenario, I think we wind up down something like 600, 700,000 seniors nationally. Under the most optimistic circumstances, I think we still wind up down about 85 to 100,000 seniors. And so when we are thinking about admissions and what our admissions pipeline looks like for the class of 2024, we are unfortunately very much in a circumstance where we are in our third year out of 5, where we have a once in a lifetime once in a lifetime. Detrimental enrollment event, right? We saw enrollment for class of 2020 and 2021 really take a dive, and class 2024, I suspect, will be a lot worse than those. I mean, if FAFSA completion and if the long-standing relationship between FAFSA completion and immediate enrollment holds, I can't see an outcome where the class of 2024 doesn't have enrollment losses on par with 2020 or 2021 or worse, based on what we're seeing in the FAFSA completion data right now. NCAN does have a lot of resources. I'm just like rounding into home here on this. We have a whole Better FAFSA resources page that you can share, you can use. This deck will definitely go out. You can click all these links. We have an awareness toolkit. We have training toolkits. We've had a whole webinar series. I mean, we really have tried to put out as many things as possible that are plug and play for doing outreach around financial aid and the Better FAFSA. Our hope is that we can get more hands on deck to do that outreach, to do that communication with students and families, so that they can learn more about the financial aid that might be available to them. I do have a quick plug in here about NCAN membership. If you're interested in joining or you like what you're hearing today, certainly would love to talk with you about that. But in the meantime, my contact information is here. Please do reach out. I wouldn't put my email address on here if I didn't want you to use it. I'm happy to answer questions, comments, concerns. I really appreciate your time. I apologize. I know that I didn't have a lot of good news for you here today. I normally like to be the bearer of good news. Unfortunately, the way the spring has played out, I have not had a lot of good news to deliver, but I'm hopeful that in a future academic year that I will, and that you'll bring me back to chat more about what we are seeing nationally and within the southern states. So I'm happy to take your questions. And again, thanks so much for having me here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bill. We have some conversations happening in the Q&A right now. Someone did note that you're the best. Don't be afraid to reach out to you. So that may be a colleague of yours, but thank you again. So we have a few questions that have come through the Q&A that I would love to address to you at this time. The first question is regarding FAFSA completion and submission. And so you touched on this throughout your presentation, but the question reads, some of my students need to correct their parents' email address to send an invite, specifically to assist their students' parents with correcting the FAFSA. So the question is, when will corrections be allowed? If you can share any insight on when students and their supporters can be expected to be permitted to submit corrections. They also noted that they have reached out and shared a message specifically with the Department of Education, but they are waiting on a response. So any insight you would be able to share on that?
Yeah, my understanding is that corrections opened on April 12th, and then were like widely available and being advertised last week. So they should be available. They should be able to go in now and correct email addresses or anything else they need to do.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. And hopefully that was helpful to you all, our audience as well. And then there is a question as well. Can you repeat what the FAFSA completion rate is right now?
Sure. Nationally, it's 29.3%.
Thank you.
And that's compared to last year through April 12th. It was about 40. Let me load it. Hold on a second. It was 46.8% this time last year for the class of 2023. So a 17.5 percentage point difference.
Thank you for sharing as well. I would like to know, audience, if you have any additional questions, feel free to use the Q&A box to address those questions to Bill as well. But Bill, I do have another question that really relates to completion and more so the submission of the FAFSA as well. So thank you again for sharing resources that can help students as well as their supporters as they are navigating college admission and FAFSA completion and submission as well. But at this point in the year, we get this question pretty often. often as well in the work that we do individually. At this point in the year, for families and supporters of college-bound students who are still waiting for FAFSA completion, or just to start to receive their offer letters, how would you recommend that college-bound students and their supporters go about deciding on a college or university, even if they do not have a financial aid offer letter?
Yeah, it's a pretty tricky question. I mean, and this advising piece is not really my wheelhouse, but I guess what I would say is that you can look at things like the college scorecard and try to estimate what net price might be for your family's income level. That would give you kind of a rough measure of what you might expect to see in an award letter. But I think this is the big crunch, right? Is that normally we would have a lot wider window to receive those award letters and to compare them, right? And to make the best decision about where, and in some cases about whether, to matriculate. So, I guess my hope is that now that institutional financial aid offices are getting ICER data, that award letters should start coming out more quickly. But I think the best thing that you can do, right, is to kind of compare. Here's what I would do. I guess here's what I would do in the circumstance. I would be looking at the different characteristics of the schools that I'm considering, right? The academic programs, distance from home, the graduation rates, all the different things that go into a matriculation decision, and maybe use the information from the college scorecard about net price by income as a placeholder, right? But try to use all the characteristics about the institutions that are on your list and use that comparison with the college scorecard data as a placeholder. I realize that affordability and what is actually going to cost a student or family is a major component of the matriculation decision. I totally understand that, but there isn't really a ton, that we can do. I mean, if the institution has a net price calculator, then you can go ahead and use their net price calculator, from previous years to maybe get a sense of what your net price might be. If the affordability part is the missing component.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's very sound advice and insight that I'm certain would help not only us in the work that we do, but also those who are joining us in this space as well. And then I do have one final question for you, unless another question comes through the Q&A. But as we look at some of the implications you shared and projections for the path forward, what are some of the best ways, in your opinion, what are some of the best ways for school counselors specifically to assist students and their supporters or their families who run into challenges with the FAFSA this year? So you shared some resources, but is there any additional advice or insight that you would like to share with them as they navigate those challenges as well?
I think one thing that has been really challenging about this cycle is that data has been pretty hard to come by, right? So if you're in a state where your state education agency passes student level FAFSA completion data down to you, that hasn't been available for large parts of the cycle. And so as soon as that gets turned on from the state, I think it's really important to start incorporating that into your practice, because that gives you a sense of who has and hasn't completed a FAFSA. You might be able to compare that against lists of students who have and haven't applied, right? And that gives you kind of a triage list about where to put your efforts and your energy. Without just going around and asking students, have you completed the FAFSA yet? It's very hard to know. And so when you're kind of like flying blind in that way, it's very difficult to divert attention in a strategic way. And so if you are in a state that shares student level FAFSA completion data, I would definitely be looking at that. Otherwise, I would maybe send out a student survey with identifiable information, right? Like with that students can self-identify, so you can get a sense of who hasn't completed the FAFSA and where you might still need to put some extra energy to get that student over the finish line. I think the other piece is that, normally by June 30th, most of the high school senior FAFSAs that are going to come in over the course of the cycle have come in. I think we have to be prepared this summer for a much longer tail of FAFSA completion over the summer. Some districts and schools already provide summer melt resources, right, where you have a person on call and you can ask questions about housing deposits or troubleshoot transportation challenges getting to a campus, or even just be reassured that college is still for you. FAFSA completion is usually some part of that, but not a huge chunk of the pie chart. I think this year is going to be a big chunk of the pie chart, right, where you're going to have students coming late to the process who still need assistance, and whatever kind of summer support plans your district or school has or could have, having someone there who is FAFSA fluent, I think is really important.
Thank you for sharing. I'm also taking notes from my end as well. Looking at the summer support plan, even from my perspective and the perspective of those that I work with, and really ensuring that we are still providing that all hands on deck approach to this process as well. Thank you, Bill. And then we do have another question. So the question reads, does Bill have ICER data that you would be able to share?
I don't have ICER data. No, the data that I get, I'll share the website with you. So this comes out every Friday. I'll put it right here for everybody. This comes out every Friday. It's at the high school level. I do not have access to individual student level ICERs. And so the data that is there, it shows submissions and completions through a date for the current year and the previous year. And if a high school has less than 5, either submissions or completions, it's going to show up as less than 5, right? They suppress the data at a certain point. It would be interesting to have ICER data, but no, at least in my current position, I'm not privy to that kind of information.
No worries. Thank you so much. So it looks like, from what I can see, we do not have any additional questions in the Q&A. So at this time, unless another question pops up, but at this time, I would first like to thank each of you, audience, for joining us for today's session, and a special thank you to Bill for sharing your insight and your perspective as we look at FAFSA state and national trends, but then also look at projections and implications for the path forward as well. I would also like to thank Christine Hall, Brian Cooper, and Stephanie, who joined us from the audience, for joining in as part of our SACAC Webinars Committee. We appreciate you. From here, again, please feel free to look out for SACAC announcements about upcoming webinars coming soon. As a reminder, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available momentarily and will be provided by SACAC directly. So again, thank you all for joining us for this timely session. We hope that it was helpful and insightful for you all. And until next time, have a great day.